Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What's the creepiest thing you've ever experienced, but nobody believes you when you tell them? Part 2. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was a child, I was kicking some toy soccer ball in my room. After I kicked it for several times, the last one I tried to kick it really hard. The ball disappeared, and I was really surprised. I tried to search the room, and suddenly after 5 minutes of looking for the toy soccer ball, I sit in front of a door near a wall. The ball suddenly appears, and it had the sound effects of a ball hitting a wall when it appeared. I still remember it clearly, and no one ever believed me when I tell it. After being in a car accident, I was in the back of a pickup. I fractured my back. You could see the indenture from my back in the truck bed. While recovering at home, I had an out-of-body experience. I saw my arms come up and I floated around the room. I did have a vision where everyone was multicolored with multiple appendages, and a voice said the knowledge was at the library. Me and my sister, when we were 9 and 8 years old, were in a living room playing on a winter evening. Heard a knock on the window. We went to it and opened the night curtains. There was a face of a mudman, as we called it. We got scared and told everyone, but no one believed us. Years later, just last year, we were speaking about it and realized our father's brother had been missing for a while, and he was found a couple of weeks later frozen when he fell in mud while walking drunk. I used to get premonitions as a kid. I recall one night standing in the kitchen with my mom. We lived close to the train tracks. I heard the crossing bells start up, normal, followed by a very loud screeching of tires and the sound of a loud banging collision, not normal. It was so startling I jumped and turned to my mom, who was right next to me, and said, "What was that?" She said she didn't hear anything. The crossing bell suddenly stopped. I remember looking at the clock. It was 6 p.m. Less than 3 hours later, 2 teens, twins, were killed when they tried to race the train in their car. This sort of thing started happening so frequently, my mom told me to stop telling her when it was happening. I narrowly missed a shooting outside a hotel, had a really bad gut feeling, and promptly left. I predicted another car crash my classmate was involved in when she stole a car. I also do really weird shit to electronics. It's called the Polly effect, or the slider effect. That's one just very annoying. People don't believe me all the time, until they see it in action. Do you think children or toddlers have some type of innate power that we just lose as we learn and grow? Or was this person just an outlier? Not necessarily creepy, but I get chills every time I think about this one. I was running late to catch my plane to go to my aunt's funeral in another province due to work going overtime. I was speeding on the highway to get to the airport on time. There were no cars behind me and no cars in front of me. When I crested a hill, I saw a police car set up with photo radar. I knew he got me for speeding as he began to pull out and turn his lights on. As he was pulling in behind me, a rusted-out gray VW Beetle came blowing past us much faster than I had been going. The cop quickly pulled out from behind me and began pursuit on the Beetle. I ended up making my flight as they were calling my name over the loudspeakers at the airport, and I made it to the funeral. I was telling this story to some of my family members at the funeral, and that's when my grandma began to break down crying. I asked what's up, and I was told that the very first car my aunt had gotten was a rusted-out gray VW Beetle. When I was a teenager, I was big into urban exploration. One of my favorite spots was this abandoned boarding school that closed down in the late 80s. As far as I know, it didn't have a reputation as a paranormal hotspot, but one of the creepiest experiences I ever had was at that place. Now, I've seen some creepy shit before, but this one was off the charts. It was my 3rd or 4th visit to this place, so I had the layout pretty well figured out. I was trying to locate this one building that I hadn't explored yet, but I couldn't find it. I knew perfectly well where it was, but it just wasn't there. It was very foggy that day, so I thought I got turned around in the fog, but then I noticed that none of the buildings were in the places I remembered them being when I was there last. It gets weirder. Throughout the whole experience, I felt like I was being watched. I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, and I kept hearing noises like talking or whispering. I just brushed it off as other explorers, since it was kind of a popular spot in my area and it's not unusual to see other people, but I never ran into anyone. In fact, I didn't even see or hear any of the usual animals, birds, squirrels, rabbits, the occasional deer, etc., that normally hang around there. I had this weird feeling that I was the only living soul in that place. Then I started to hear singing. the weird, ethereal sounding singing. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it got louder and louder until it just stopped. Then I heard the loudest, most ear-piercing, bloody, murderous scream I've ever heard in my life. The kind of scream that made every hair on my body stand straight up. As soon as I heard it, I ran like hell out of there faster than I ever thought I could run. Adrenaline is a wonderful thing. I asked other explorers who've been to that particular place if they've encountered anything similar, but they told me they haven't. A few days after my dad died, I found a picture of him in my glove compartment in my car. It was a picture of him in his late 20s or early 30s that I've never seen in my life. It had no scratches or folds. It looked like a freshly printed photo. I assumed maybe one of my sisters had put it in there, though I didn't know when they could have. But I asked everyone, and no one has ever seen this picture of him. I still have no idea where this picture came from. Coming home late after dinner with friends, I drove past a car wash that should have been closed. As I was stopped at a red light, I could see the waiting area was lit bright like the lights were on. I also noticed a woman wearing a white dress with hair down to her lower back facing away from me. Of course, no one believed me and even mocked me for it. A couple of days later, I washed my car at the same car wash and told one of the employees about it. He said that if it were true, he wouldn't doubt it, and points out that behind the car wash is a cemetery. Saw my uncle in a dream around 4 years ago in the fall. In the dream, it was purely white space with outlines of a dock and implied water. It was my uncle and I sitting there. He was fishing, but I was just accompanying him. I was 22 at the time, but in the dream I looked to be around 8. Without looking at me and just staring off into the whiteness, he said to me, "Sorry, I couldn't take you fishing sooner." He had promised me ever since I was 5 to take me fishing, as he was like the cool uncle of the family. Was only about 26 when I was 5. He brought me a PS2 complete with pirated games and an assortment of Digimon toys every time he visited. Well, I woke up that morning to my mom pounding at my door, only to tell me my uncle had passed while on a fishing trip in San Diego. He had a form of heart attack triggered by the cold of the ocean and died in his sleep. I'll never forget that dream, and I'll never forget my uncle. I have a daughter who's about to be 6. Occasionally, she comes in and sleeps with me and my husband because she wants to snuggle. Around Christmas, as some do, we have a tree up, and its lights are bright enough that they illuminate the hallway pretty well. She had just been put to bed, and my husband and I were talking in bed when she silently walks into the doorway. She doesn't say anything, just ducks down like she doesn't want us to see her so she can sneak into bed. She doesn't get in the bed. I ask her what she's doing, no answer. Tell her to get in the bed, she doesn't. So I get up, and she's not in the room. She's passed out in her bed across the hall. My husband saw her, I saw her, but it wasn't her. Me and the cop that had pulled me over in rural central Missouri, kind of near the nuclear plant in Callaway country, saw a UFO fly in a way that would not be survivable to a human due to the G-forces involved. Watching it was absolutely terrifying, and I thought the cop was going to pass out from shock. No one believes me when I tell this story, and tell me it was probably a stealth bomber from Whiteman Air Force Base. I've seen that aircraft fly in person more than a dozen times. It was not a B-2 Spirit. Cop was too shook to write the speeding ticket, though, so that was nice. Look, any way to get out of a ticket is a good way to get out of a ticket, so thanks, aliens. At my grandmother's house, there's a bedroom we call the room in the back. As the name suggests, it's at the end of a corridor, last bedroom to your left. I've always had creepy vibes whenever I would step inside that room. I always hated it and thought something was wrong with it, and I would learn later on that I wasn't the only one. When I was a kid, around 7 or 8, I was sleeping there and woke up on the floor in total darkness. First of all, waking up outside of my bed had never happened to me before that and has never happened since. But the strangest thing was that I couldn't see a thing. And yet, there usually was always light coming from the streetlights outside and shining through the blinds. I was terrified, but tried to calm myself and act rationally. I walked on all fours and touched around me, looking for the side of the bed in a room that was supposed to be pretty small. I couldn't find the damn bed. In fact, I would touch furniture, but I could not recognize any of it. It was all completely foreign to me. I decided to try and find a wall to follow it until I could find the bed. I never found any wall. I would just continually bump on furniture and various objects that I absolutely could not identify despite being familiar with that room. I don't know how long I tried to find the bed, but I remember looking up in the dark and wondering what to do. I knew I could scream for help. My parents were sleeping in the next bedroom, but I imagined them finding me screaming on the floor, and I decided not to do it to avoid embarrassment. After a while, I gave up and stopped moving. I don't remember much after that. I probably fell asleep. I woke up the next day. I was in the bed. It could have been a dream, but it absolutely did not feel like a dream. And as a natural lucid dreamer, I would know. A few years ago, I was visiting my aunt, who's from the other side of the family. She's always claimed she was a witch and is into a lot of new age stuff. I've always remained pretty skeptical, but I have to admit, she had managed to do some weird stuff over the years. Very accurate predictions. We were having tea and talking about our families. She mentioned the only time she ever visited my grandmother's house was when I was a baby, and I used it as an opportunity to see if, as a witch, she had perceived anything weird there. I didn't want to influence her, so I only asked her, "Did you feel anything unusual there?" "Oh yes," she exclaimed. "The room in the back. The one on the left at the end of the corridor. There is something wrong with it." She literally said in a different language, that side of the family is from a different country, "The room in the back." Once back home, I finally confronted my mother about it, asking her if anything weird had ever happened there. She had, after all, spent her entire childhood in that house. My grandmother had built it when she was a few years old. My mother's face became white, and she admitted to me that when she was little, she went there with friends, and they all sat around, jokingly trying to invoke spirits. They were all holding hands, sitting on the floor, and they said, "Spirit, if you're here, knock 3 times. Apparently, 3 violent knocks followed, and they all ran screaming. She told me that since then, the room has always felt weird. Hey guys, let's do this fun game called sitting in a circle and invoke some spirits. What's the worst that could happen? Well, there you go. That's the worst that could happen. You did it. Just go buy a Ouija board next time. A few years ago, I was camping for the first time with friends. We found a fantastic spot on a beach. Ended up being a nudist beach, but that's another story. We get set up, having a great time. I, however, made an error and drank a Coke Zero from the esky. IBS sorbitol sets it off. Not fun. At about 12 a.m., I wake up with the usual cramping. The closest toilet is a 500-meter walk through the bush and a 3-minute car ride away. It's pitch black, and I'm using my phone screen light to get to the car. Unfortunately, it's on 10%, and iPhone being iPhone, the 10% lasted about 10 seconds. Try turning it back on, no cigar. I was about halfway through the walk when this happened. I freak. I stopped, realized I'd lost the path, and crouched as I was a bit cold and thought through what I was going to do. In pain, I got up and tried to feel the path out and kept walking. This is where it gets creepy and weird. I stopped, crouched again as I was still lost and the pain was far worse, and then get back up and keep walking. About 2 minutes later, I feel no ground under my front foot and see the moon reflecting off the water as I'm falling to my death, as this was obviously the cliff about 10 meters from the path. I hit the water and rocks. Then I'm suddenly back, crouched where I was about 2 minutes earlier. My hair was wet, but my clothes were dry. I try my phone again. Suddenly it starts up. I waste no time using its light to find the path and rush to the car. After fixing myself up and even having a warm shower, the closest toilet was a caravan park. I go back to the car, drive back to the parking lot, and slept in the car. I definitely wasn't walking back after that experience. No one believed me, and to be honest, I'm not sure I believe me anymore. Maybe the pain made me pass out? To this day, I cannot remember if this is a dream or a memory, but I remember it clear as day. In my neighborhood as a kid, we would all meet up in this abandoned lot and play kickball and whatever kids did back then. I went one day and no one was there. I sat for a while and an ice cream truck that knew we were always back there came through. As it looped, I got on my bike and was about to start heading home. Behind the ice cream truck, there was a shadow of a human-like thing with huge pointy feet. It almost looked like it was skipping behind it, then just flipped and started heading towards me. I freaked out and pedaled as fast as I could, and this thing chased after me all the way to my house. It is, to this day, one of my scariest memories, and I tear up when I tell the story. I've stopped telling it because everyone says I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. Sorry if it looks weird, I'm on mobile. I was driving home from the beach years ago and pulled into a rest stop. It was late, like 1 a.m., and there was one car in the parking lot. I get out and head to the bathroom and thought it was a little odd that the only other car there was idling with the headlights off. I had to go bad, so I didn't look closely. Go into the bathroom, which appeared empty, and pee. While standing there, I can feel someone watching me. Hairs on my neck stood up. Not a good feeling, especially when I heard some feet shuffle. I run back to my car. The other vehicle was still there, engine running. This time, I could see that no one was in it that I could tell. Backing out of the parking space, I swear I saw a person standing at the bathroom's entrance looking at me. My girlfriend at the time said I made it up to try and freak her out. I don't stop at rest stops at night anymore. Still freaks me out. Phantom hitchhiker. When I was 21-ish, I worked in a remote area that was a 40-minute commute one way. I also worked a lot of nights. I saw the hitchhiker 3 times in the same spot wearing the same clothes. He was a middle-aged Latino in a maroon shirt, plaid jacket, and a red baseball hat. At first, I thought he was a dairy worker. There were a couple nearby, but nearby was still 3 miles. That wasn't even taking into consideration that he was wearing a heavy coat in the middle of summer. I kept driving. I saw him again months later. Same clothes, same spot, thumb out. I actually got a better look this time because it was winter and raining so hard my wiper blades could barely keep up. But he didn't seem to see me. He was looking down the road past me. Anybody standing in the rain coming down that hard would have been soaked, but he wasn't. The final time was shortly before I quit that job. It was early summer and my hours had changed slightly, so when I saw him again, the sun was just starting to set. Then, what I had suspected was confirmed. His shirt wasn't maroon like I thought. It was stained with blood. I passed by that spot twice a day. There were new crosses going up on that road all the time because it was flat and straight with nothing around except the odd dairy or cornfield for miles. It was known for being a bad stretch, where lots of people died. I never noticed the cross where he stood because it had fallen over. When I left that job for the last time, I pulled over where he stood and found his cross and propped it up again. It said Poppy. That was almost 20 years ago. I hope he finally got picked up. I'm not exactly sure what is going on here, but I have had several instances within the last couple of years where I'm falling asleep and I can hear an intense sound repeatedly, but I don't fully recognize it, respond to it for a minute or so. It's kind of like when you're falling asleep and you suddenly jerk because you think you tripped or you're falling, but with an intense knocking or screaming noise. It occurs for about 45 seconds before it's so loud in my head that I can't ignore it. I jerk awake, and then suddenly it's gone, and I realized it was just in my head. It's not associated with a dream. It happens when I'm still conscious and I'm not schizophrenic.